Let me first start off by saying I was once where you probably are. Bigfoot is a fake, phony, and fraud. Something that was born in the mind of a guy who had probably had too much to drink and too much time on his hands. That's what I used to think. Please humor me as I share this account. I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. How could something that doesn't exist save your marriage? But I can say that with confidence because, well, it actually does exist, and it did in fact save my marriage. My wife and I have been together for about 10 years at this point. We were stressed with inflation, cost of living, bills, and work. Our schedules never seemed to match to where we could spend any quality time together. I worked 12-hour shifts and she worked 8 hours. We would go to work, come home at night and quietly eat dinner together, only to fall in bed directly after our showers and go to sleep, all to replay that same routine the next day and the next. The weekends were much the same. I would always pick up at least one extra day to work an overtime shift. More money, right? Working 6 days a week out of 7. Well, it really does a lot of damage to a relationship. I began seeing her distancing herself more and more from me, and I decided enough was enough. I told her that the following weekend we were going into the woods. Now, to preface this, she wasn't a big camper. She didn't like the idea of putting up a tent and laying in a sleeping bag on the cold ground. So I surprised her with a nice cabin in the middle of the woods. Just she and I. We got to the cabin that Friday morning. We both made arrangements at our job and extended our stay to come home on Monday night. The cabin was really nice, and the description matched what it said it was. Nothing but thick trees all the way around it, with only a path leading down to a lake. She had gone in to light a fire in the fireplace while I unloaded the car. That's when it started. I had just finished getting the last of what we brought out of the trunk, and I heard what sounded like a bat hitting a tree. I thought it was odd, but I shook it off and took the stuff to the deck stairs of the cabin. I turned to lock the car and I heard it again. For some reason, I was afraid. I used to go into the woods all the time when I was young and never felt this fear or unease. Nonetheless, I again shrugged it off and went inside. It was getting cold outside, so the warmth that hit me was nice. The next day, we decided to go out on a hike. Since fall was setting in, all the snakes, spiders, and especially ticks would be at bay. The lake bordered the property, and she and I walked down to the dock to enjoy the scenery. After some small talk of how this would be a nice place to come to in the summer, everything fell silent around us. The birds that were once chirping stopped. There were no insect noises, even the wind seemed to die down some. It was just eerily quiet. We both looked at each other and I could see in her face that she was growing uneasy, just like I was back at the cabin. At that time, there were still enough leaves on the trees to where we couldn't see through them. All of a sudden, something came tearing through them. It was extremely loud because everything else around us was now so quiet. My wife screamed as a big deer burst through the brush and trees. I stifled a chuckle because I knew that would only make her angry. She hugged me so tight. In the midst of everything, the hug was nice. It had been a while since I was able to just hold her. Anyway, she made it known quickly that she was ready to go back to the cabin, so I held her hand and we walked back up. I didn't mention this to her, but I could hear footsteps other than our own as we made our way back. I would just glance around from time to time so I wouldn't bring attention to it, but I never saw anything. But these were definitely footsteps. Over dinner that night, we both laughed as we talked about the deer. The laughter, however, would soon be driven out by fear. The screams started in the middle of that night. We had left the fireplace on, and it had grown overly hot, so we cracked our bedroom window before bed. Even if the window was closed all the way, we still would have heard the screams. It honestly sounded like a human at first, a female being attacked. We both jerked awake at the same time. It was terrifying, blood-curdling, and as if it were right outside the cabin. I assured her that it was probably a big cat and that the cabin was secure. In my mind, though, I could only hope I was right. I just wanted her to feel safe there. I got out of the bed, and she followed close behind, hanging onto the tail of my t-shirt. I walked to the window to close it, and that's when another almost yell rang out and kind of echoed around. This yell was way different than what we had first heard. It was low, long, and whatever this was had to have lungs as big as Mack trucks. I know how this sounds, and I promise I'm not crazy. The way it moaned was almost like a return call to the scream. I questioned my prior theory at this point that it was merely a big cat. "What the hell was that?" she asked me, obviously frightened. I didn't know how to answer that because I myself didn't know what the hell that was. It then came back to me. Those stories I would hear people talk about. The tree knocks, the screams and yells. The fear and uneasiness of just being out in the woods. I also remembered a story I heard an old man talking about at a bar one night about being paced out of the woods by something when he had gone out hunting. That was a good description of what happened to us. But how is that going to sound to her, you know? Yeah, honey, it's just a Bigfoot. Let's go back to bed. She would be ready to pack and leave right then. Not out of fear either, but because she would think I flipped my lid. We didn't go back to bed that night, but she eventually curled up on the large, oversized sofa in the living room and fell back to sleep a little while later. I quietly walked outside to see if I could ascertain what could have been making those noises. 2 very different vocalizations and then nothing. The whole thing was odd and I was trying to put the pieces together. I shone my phone's flashlight to the back and surrounding side of the cabin. Nothing. I was glad and disheartened all at the same time. I walked back in and about 30 minutes later, a hard smack fell onto the side of our cabin. It felt like the cabin itself shook. I ran over to the couch where my wife sat, now awake and trembling. I got to be honest, that was enough to scare me too. I had just come from outside and I didn't see anything at all. I looked at my watch and noted that it was a little after 5 in the morning and that the sun would be up soon. No other sounds came. No yells, screams, and nothing else hit the cabin. At this point, it was Sunday and we had 1 full day and a half left here at the cabin. I didn't want that time to be ruined by some mysterious whatever that seemed to feel threatened by us. She and I made a pact to stay together, no matter what, when we went outside later to go back down to the lake to have lunch. It was like any normal day, minus the previous night's occurrences. The sun was warm, but the wind was cool as it came off the top of the water. As we sat and ate, small pebbles started falling around us. Then small sticks. We dismissed it as just stuff falling out of the trees above us. Next came a low grunt, almost as if something or someone was disgusted with us being there. No one else was on that property though. I made sure of that when I booked it. Feeling frightened and immense sudden fear, we quickly gathered our food and started making our way back to the safety of the cabin. We never made it. We were being flanked, one on our right side as well as our left. The large bipedal footsteps were heavy, and it was all too real to me now. The stories I had overheard all those years were actually true. Knocks surrounded us then. We were being followed with no way out. I strained to see through the trees at what exactly this could be, but it was still too thick. My wife grabbed my hand tighter and looked at me with tears streaming down her face as we tried to walk as fast as we could. "Don't run, boy." My grandfather's words echoed in my head. He had told me that all too many times when teaching me about predators. This is exactly what I felt like these things were. We were being stalked by predators. Our legs felt like they had boulders tied to them. We couldn't move as fast as we wanted to. I vowed to my wife as we trudged through that if we made it out of here alive, that things would be different. She did the same, saying that there's more to life than money and that we needed each other above everything else. We had almost reached the cabin and a large tree off to the side came crashing down and an even louder tree knock rang out. With all we had left in us, we ran. At that point, I had absolutely dismissed what my grandfather said. This was life or death, and we chose life. We made it back to the cabin, threw all of our things haphazardly in the suitcases and hauled ass out of there, not even looking back. My wife and I just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, and it's all thanks to Bigfoot.